Well, more pressure is now being put on the international community to investigate claims that Russia has committed war crimes. The Kremlin denies that its forces were responsible for the deaths in Bucha and said on Tuesday that Western allegations of Russian war crimes were a monstrous forgery.
Well, let's talk now to the former commander of UK and NATO chemical, biological and nuclear forces, Colonel Hamish de Bretton-Gordon. Thank you for joining us. A lot of people, I think, are wondering at the pictures that we're beginning to see of these areas where the Russians have withdrawn from, that if they're capable of that sort of atrocity, surely they are also capable of the use of chemical and biological weapons. What do you think?
Well, I think the Russians are capable of absolutely anything. It's very clear that President Putin has no concern about collateral damage or civilian casualties, having bombed hospitals and schools. And as you said in your piece, beginning to hear about the atrocities that have happened, war crimes where civilians have been shot and others have been held captive. So I think we need to bear that in the back of our minds. I would say, the Ukrainian army have won in the north. Winning is a habit, as is losing. And I think we must really enable the Ukraine people to push that home. It would appear that the Russians are regrouping, heading east to try and take the whole of the Donbass and reinforce it in the southern areas and take Mariupol. But I think now is the time to step up our efforts with weaponry and with support, so that what ultimately we need to do is to enable the Ukrainians to hold the Russians so we can sue for peace, get Putin around the peace table and allow these very brave people to rebuild their country.
Yeah, Colonel, in terms of helping out the Ukrainians, we were talking to someone from Chatham House earlier on who came out with what ends up being a pretty controversial view. And she was saying, look, we need to call Putin's bluff on all of this. She thinks his sense of self-preservation is so high that actually, if we went in and provided actual assistance, boots on the ground, to the Ukrainian army, that actually he wouldn't dare launch anything like nuclear strikes, even if they were strategic nuclear missiles. She says that we need to start really pushing against him.
Well, I agree in part to what perhaps she said there, and I think we absolutely need to get on the front foot. I've always been a great advocate of no-fly zones, as I was in Syria and Iraq. That is Putin's worst nightmare, and I think we should seriously look at it and threaten it and enable the Ukraine military to produce a no-fly zone, because that will really help them in the defence around Donbass, which is days away. It doesn't necessarily mean we need British fighters, in Ukrainian airspace. But I agree, we need to get on the front foot. I think we are not yet at the position where we should commit British and American troops to the ground in Ukraine, because I don't think that's required. As I said at the beginning, the Ukraine army is a winning army. They're doing a fantastic job. What they need is more weapons, more sophisticated weapons, more support from us on the intelligent aspects and all the rest of it. Because I do agree with it, speaking from Chatham House, Putin, this is his great moment to expand Russia. It's all going terribly wrong. And, I suppose in a way he needs to get a way out. But the other really key thing is the Russian people need to know what is happening in their name, these war crimes. And there's just a sniff with some of the stuff coming out of Moscow over the last 24 hours that people are beginning to realise the Russian army is suffering dreadful casualties, manpower casualties as well as equipment. And I'm sure once the Russian people realise what's happening in their name, then they will do the job of removing Putin, rather than us getting embroiled in a battle on the ground that could lead to something like nuclear confrontation.
Well, we always understood, didn't we, that if there were a no-fly zone, that would actually be tantamount to provoking Putin into doing something nuclear. So how could we help them implement a no-fly zone without actually putting our own fighters in there?
Well, this is something we looked at in great detail over Syria for exactly the same reasons. But you don't necessarily need aircraft in airspace. We have very sophisticated air-to-air missiles, ground-to-air missiles that could do the same job. We also have very sophisticated drones, unmanned aerial vehicles. that can do the job. And if we enable the Ukraine Air Force with more aircraft, and there are aircraft on offer to them, then they could do the job. The Ukraine Air Force have got the measure of the Russian Air Force quite remarkably. But, they're running out of aeroplanes, and we need to make sure that they have more. Now, I heard a British politician yesterday saying that we should give them British aircraft and British tanks. Now, that would be crazy, because that would take months to train people to do it. But like the Czech Republic, who gave them some old Russian tanks this week, we should be scouring around and getting them as many tanks and aircraft, those aircraft and tanks that they know how to operate, so that they can do the job themselves. So when I say a no-fly zone, I mean it run and policed by the Ukrainians, but enabled by NATO.
Interesting. Well, it's interesting. I just got to reflect on the point. We haven't got any tanks, have we? I mean, the UK. I mean, we've got armoured. We've got troops trained in armoured deployment. We haven't got any tanks to work on at the minute.
Well, it's very easy to give the tank corps a hard time. I was a tank commander, and I'm very fond of that organisation. But we don't have many, but what we have, they're very good, and our tank crews and tank regiments are excellent.
How do you read the next step then? We're talking there about implementing some sort of a no-fly zone with ground-to-air missiles, or helping them with their aeroplanes. Do you think that is actually might be what will happen next?
Well, I very much hope so. And as I said earlier, the Ukrainian army, the Ukrainian military, the Ukrainian population are winning. They are defeating this invasion force. They have the morale to do it, despite the war crimes that are being committed against them. And a winning army, and people will know that, once you're in a winning team, it really becomes habitual. And we must help them and enable them, because if we give them the wherewithal, be it tanks and aircraft and intelligence, then they can hold, if not push the Russians back. And the Russians have already been defeated in the north. If we can enable them to hold them in the east and the south, then, the Russians must sue for peace. And if Putin doesn't sue for peace, I'm sure his forces, who, there are stories of many, many Russian soldiers deserting and not fighting with the vigour one would expect, that we can turn the tables. And ultimately, it's the Russian people who need to get rid of Putin, not NATO or Ukraine.
OK. Colonel Hamish de Bretton-Gordon, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Yes.
Gosh, do you know, there were even stories, I don't know if you read them as well, that the reason they've lost so many major people, generals, is because apparently they've been talking on their mobile phones to each other. And the Ukrainians have been able to hack into their mobile phone calls, been able to strategically pinpoint them, and bam. Yeah. Apparently that's the reason that they've lost so many of their own generals.
That's interesting.
So it really hasn't gone Putin's way.
No, and I think there seems to be some real strategic problems with how they've operated in all of this. I mean, thank heavens in some respects, but then they've lost an awful lot of young people.
But he said there the Ukrainians have won in the north. They've won, which is astonishing.
Well, it is astonishing.
But they paid a terrible high price.
This is
it. Astonishing and amazing and brilliant. That really is true. It's going to
take a long time, though. The recovery process is going to take decades.
And the grieving process. I mean, how do you get over something like that? Happened in the Balkans, didn't it? It took years and years and years. And lots of inquiries and terrible, terrible uncoverings of atrocities and things. And it looks like it's all happening again. You can't really believe it, can you?
No, and I do want to...
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows, and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.